Queen Zithara stood alone in the war room of her palace, her four eyes fixed on the holographic map that floated before her like a nightmare made of light. 3 star systems had fallen to the HFY swarm in the last month alone, and her fleet was stretched so thin that she could see the end coming. The Valorian Empire had stood for 10,000 years, and now it was crumbling like sand in a storm. Her advisors had given her options, but none of them were good. They could retreat and abandon the outer colonies to their fate. They could fight and lose everything in a blaze of glory, or they could ask for help from the human. Zithara hated that third option more than she hated the swarm itself. Humans were weak creatures from a small blue world on the edge of the galaxy. They lived for less than 100 years, which was barely enough time for a Valorian to finish their education. They had no telepathy, no natural armor, no venomous spines, and no ability to see in multiple spectrums of light. They were soft and fragile, and they died so easily that it was almost embarrassing. But they had ships, they had weapons, and they had something else that Zithara could not quite understand. Humans had a reputation for fighting wars that were not their own, for dying on planets they had never seen before, for causes that would bring them no profit. The Valorian ambassadors called it madness. The human ambassadors called it alliance. The humans had offered their help, but their price was strange and insulting. They did not want territory or resources or technology. They wanted a marriage, a political union between their Ambassador General Marcus Cole and a member of the Valorian royal family specifically. They wanted Princess Lyrith, the youngest daughter of Queen Zithara herself. Zithara had refused at first. The very idea of her daughter being bound to a human was disgusting. But then another system fell, and another, and the screams of her dying people echoed through the communication channels. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She pressed a button on her console and spoke in a voice that showed no emotion. Summon Princess Lyrith to the throne room immediately. The wait was not long. Lyrith was young by Valorian standards, barely past her 2nd century of life. She was tall and elegant, with silver scales that shimmered like starlight and eyes that held the deep purple color of Valorian royalty. She walked into the throne room with the grace that befitted her station, her ceremonial robes flowing behind her like liquid metal. "You summon me, mother," Lyrith said, bowing her head in respect. Zithara did not waste time with pleasantries. "You will marry the human Ambassador General Marcus Cole," she said, her voice as cold as the void between stars. "The ceremony will take place within the week." Lyrith's body went rigid, and her secondary hearts began to beat faster. "Mother, I do not understand." "There is nothing to understand," Zithara replied, turning back to her war map. "The Empire needs the human fleet, and the humans demand a royal marriage as the price of their alliance." "You are selling me," Lyrith whispered, and there was horror in her voice. "I am saving our people." Zithara corrected her. "Your personal feelings are irrelevant." Lyrith had studied humans in her xenobiology courses. She knew what they were: primitive mammals driven by chemical impulses they could barely control. They experienced emotions so intensely that it damaged their health. They formed irrational attachments to other beings and suffered greatly when those attachments were broken. The thought of being bound to such a creature made Lyrith want to tear off her own scales. "Mother, please," she said, and she hated how weak her voice sounded. "There must be another way." "There is no other way," Zithara said without looking at her daughter. "The human arrives within the cycle, and you will greet him as your betrothed. And if I refuse?" Now Zithara turned, and her 4 eyes were hard as diamonds. "Then you will watch our empire burn and know that you could have prevented it." "Will you do that, Lyrith? Will you let billions die because you find humans unpleasant?" Lyrith had no answer to that. She stood in Silence as the weight of her mother's words crushed. Something inside her she had always known that royal life came with. Responsibilities. She had always known that she might one day be asked to make sacrifices for her people, but she had never imagined anything like this. How long? She finally asked, "How long must I remain bound to this human?" Zithra's expression did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "As long as necessary," she said. "The alliance must appear genuine to both sides. When the war is won, we will find a way to dissolve the union quietly." That was a lie. And both of them knew it, but it was a comfortable lie. And Lyrith clung to it like a drowning creature clings to driftwood. "I will do my duty," Lyrith said. And each word tasted like poison. "I know you will," Zithar replied. "You are my daughter." She turned away again. Dismissing Lyrith without another word, the princess walked back to her chambers in a daze. Her mind spinning with thoughts she could not organize. She was going to marry a human. She was going to be bound to an alien creature for the rest of his short, brutal life. She was going to smile and pretend and play the role of a happy bride while her soul screamed in protest. And her mother did not care. Zithara had always been cold. But Lyrith had believed there was love somewhere beneath that icy exterior now. She was not so sure. Perhaps she had always been nothing more than a piece on her mother's game board, waiting to be sacrificed when the time was right in her private chambers. Lyrith stood before her mirror and looked at her reflection. She saw a princess, beautiful and proud and utterly powerless. She saw a daughter who had been sold for ships and soldiers. She saw a future that stretched before her like a prison sentence, and somewhere in the galaxy, a human named Marcus Cole was traveling toward her, carrying chains disguised as wedding rings. Lyrith did not know what the future held. She did not know if she could survive this marriage with her sanity intact, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would never forgive her mother for this, not if she lived for 10,000 years. The stars outside her window seemed dimmer than before, as if the universe itself was mourning for what she was about to lose. The human ship arrived on the third day, and it was everything Lyrith had expected. It was ugly. The vessel that descended through the atmosphere looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and held together with determination. It had no elegant curves, no flowing lines, no artistic beauty of any kind. It was a box of metal designed for one purpose only, and that purpose was survival. Lyrith watched from the palace balcony as the ship landed in the royal courtyard. She had spent the last 3 days preparing herself for this moment. She had practiced her diplomatic smile until her face ached. She had memorized the proper human greetings. She had read everything she could find about human customs and traditions. None of it helped when the ship's door opened and Marcus Cole stepped out. Lyrith felt her heart skip in unison. He was not what she had expected. The humans she had seen before were diplomats and merchants, soft people who wore expensive clothes and spoke in careful, measured tones. Marcus Cole looked like he had been carved from stone and scarred by fire. He was tall for a human, with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they had done hard work. His hair was dark but gray at the temples, and his skin was a deep brown that spoke of a sun different from the one that warmed. Valoria scars crossed his face and neck, pale lines against darker flesh that told stories of violence survived. But it was his eyes that caught Lyrith's attention. They were the color of aged wood, and they held a weight that seemed impossible for such a short-lived creature. Those eyes had seen things. Those eyes had survived things. Those eyes swept across the courtyard with the practiced assessment of a predator checking for threats. When they found Lyrith on her balcony, they stopped for a long moment. Human and Valorian simply looked at each other across the distance. Then Marcus Cole nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and walked toward the palace entrance. The formal reception was held in the throne room. with Queen Zidara seated on her crystal throne, and the entire court assembled to witness this historic moment. Lirith stood beside her mother. Wearing ceremonial robes that felt like chains, Marcus Cole walked into the room without escort, his boots making solid sounds against the marble floor. He moved differently from other humans Lirith had observed. There was no nervousness in his stride, no hesitation in his bearing. He walked like a man who had faced death so many times that a room full of alien nobility held no terror for him. "Your Majesty," he said, offering a slight bow to Queen Zitharis. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding over stone. "The Terran Confederacy thanks you for this opportunity to strengthen our alliance." Zidara inclined her head, the barest acknowledgement of his greeting. "Ambassador General Cole," she said, "you are welcome in our court. May this union bring prosperity to both our peoples." The formal words were meaningless, and everyone in the room knew it. This was a transaction, nothing more. Marcus turned to Lirith, and something in his expression shifted. It was subtle, barely visible. But Lirith caught eyes, looked at her not with desire or calculation, but with something that almost resembled concern. "Princess," he said quietly, and his voice was gentler than before, "I understand. This was not your choice." The words struck Lirith like a physical blow. She had expected many things. From this human, she had expected arrogance, or lust, or cold political maneuvering. She had not expected honesty. "It was not," she replied, matching his quiet tone. "Was it yours?" Marcus smiled, a strange expression that humans use to show warmth rather than aggression. "No," he admitted, "but I made a promise to my people. If this marriage gives the Valorian Empire the strength to stand against the swarm, then 100 worlds stay free. I can live with that. Can you live with me?" Lirith asked, and she meant it as a challenge. She knew that humans often found non-mammalian species aesthetically repulsive. She knew that her scales and multiple eyes and venomous spines would seem monstrous to him. She wanted him to flinch, to show disgust, to prove that he was exactly what she had expected. He did not flinch. "Princess, I have lived with worse than an arranged marriage," Marcus said, and there was no deception in his voice. "I have buried 3 battalions of soldiers I called friends. I have watched colonies burn and held dying children in my arms. I have made decisions that killed thousands so that millions could live. Being married to someone I do not know yet is not suffering. It is just another mission." Lirith did not know how to respond to that. She had prepared herself for a monster, and instead she had found a man who carried his own monsters inside him. "The wedding will take place tomorrow," Queen Zidara announced, cutting through the moment. "The alliance must be formalized before the swarm launches their next offensive." Marcus nodded, accepting this without argument. "As your Majesty wishes." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations and protocol. Lirith barely had time to think, which was perhaps intentional. She was measured for wedding garments, briefed on ceremonial procedures, and lectured on her duties as a political bride. Through it all, she found herself watching Marcus Cole. He attended every meeting without complaint, asked intelligent questions about Valorian customs, and made genuine efforts to pronounce names correctly when courtiers whispered insults behind their fans. He pretended not to notice when servants treated him with barely concealed contempt. He thanked them politely, and when he caught Lirith watching him, he simply nodded and returned to whatever task was before him that night. Lirith could not sleep. She lay in her chambers, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what she had seen. Marcus Cole was not the primitive brute she had expected, was not stupid or cruel or driven by base instincts. He was something else entirely, something she did not have a word for. He was a man who had lost everything and kept going. He was a soldier who had seen the worst of the universe and somehow remained capable of kindness. he was a human. And for the first time in her life, Lilith wondered if perhaps her people had underestimated that word. The wedding ceremony was brief and efficient. Scytha had stripped away most of the traditional rituals, keeping only what was necessary to make the union legally binding. Marcus stood beside Lilith at the altar, his hand hovering near hers, but never touching without permission when the priest pronounced them bound. Lilith waited for the despair to overwhelm her. It did not come instead. She felt something unexpected. She felt a strange curiosity about the human who was now her husband. She felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this arrangement would not be as terrible as she had feared, and she felt, for the first time, a tiny crack in the wall of hatred she had built around her heart. Marcus caught her eye as they turned to face the court. "Whatever happens," he said softly, so only she could hear, "I will never hurt you. I give you my word." Lilith did not believe him, but she wanted to, and that wanting was the most surprising thing of all. The HFY swarm attacked 6 cycles after the wedding, and they came with everything they had. Queen Zidara commanded the defense from her flagship, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the approaching enemy. The swarm emerged from hyperspace like a wound opening in reality. Thousands of living ships pouring through the gap between stars. Each vessel was a biological nightmare, grown rather than built, piloted by a hive mind that knew no fear and felt no mercy. Zithara had fought the swarm before. She knew their tactics and their weaknesses, but she had never seen them come in such numbers. All ships formed defensive formation. She commanded through the fleet channel. "Target their command organisms first. We will break their coordination and destroy them in detail." It was a sound strategy, one that had worked against civilized opponents for millennia. The Valorian fleet moved with telepathic precision, each captain linked to the others through mental bonds that allowed instantaneous coordination. They were beautiful in their unity, flowing through space like a single organism made of metal and light. And then the swarm hit them like a wave hitting sand. The HFY did not fight with strategy. They fought with numbers. For every command organism the Valorians destroyed, 10 more took its place. For every hole they carved in the enemy formation, 100 ships rushed to fill it. The elegant Valorian tactics shattered against the brutal simplicity of overwhelming Fort Zithara. Watched her ships die on the tactical display. Watched her captains scream and go silent. Watched her beautiful fleet crumble like glass under a hammer. "Your Majesty," our communications officer said, his voice tight with fear, "the human fleet is requesting permission to engage." Zithara had almost forgotten about the humans. Their ships hung at the edge of the battle, ugly metal boxes that looked laughably primitive compared to the sleek Valorian vessels. She had planned to hold them in reserve, to use them as a sacrifice to cover her retreat if things went badly. Things were going badly. "Permission granted," she said. "Tell them to support our left flank." What happened next changed everything Zidara thought she knew about humans. The human ships did not move to support the left flank. Instead, they broke formation entirely, scattering in seemingly random directions. For a moment, Zidara thought they were retreating, abandoning their allies in the face of certain death. Then she realized what they were actually doing. They were attacking. Each human ship moved independently, its captain making decisions without waiting for orders from above. They dove into the swarm like predators, weaving between enemy vessels with a recklessness that bordered on insanity. A human destroyer lost its engines and kept firing. A human cruiser took 3 direct hits and rammed itself into a HFY carrier, a human frigate. Its weapons depleted, accelerated to maximum velocity, and used its own hull as a projectile. Marcus Cole's voice came through the command channel, calm and steady as if he were discussing the weather. "Valorian command, recommend you pull your flanks back about 60 degrees. We are going to make a hole in their center. Follow us through." Zidara stared at the display in disbelief. "Ambassador, that formation is suicide. You will lose half your ships." "Yeah, Marcus replied, and there was something almost like humor in his voice. We know. The human fleet drove into the heart of the swarm like a knife into flesh. They died by the dozens, their ships exploding in brilliant flashes of light. But they did not stop, they did not slow down, they did not retreat, and wherever they went, they left destruction behind them. Zythara had studied human military history. She knew about their wars, their battles, their endless conflicts with each other and with the universe. But reading about human ferocity was different from seeing it. Humans fought like something ancient and terrible, like prey animals that had evolved claws and fangs, and a burning hatred for everything that had ever tried to kill them. They fought with a fury that made the swarm itself seem hesitant. They fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. When the battle ended 4 hours later, the swarm was broken. Their surviving ships fled back through hyperspace, leaving behind a graveyard of shattered vessels. The border was secured, the Empire was saved, and 40% of the human fleet was dead. Zythara found Marcus in the medical bay afterward, sitting alone beside a holographic display of casualty reports. The names scrolled past in an endless list, each one representing a human who had died fighting someone else's war. Marcus did not look up when she entered. His face was carved from stone, every emotion locked away behind walls of discipline and duty. But his hands were shaking. Your people fought with honor, Zythara said, unsure why she felt the need to speak to him at all. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. My people fought because the alternative was letting yours die. Marcus replied without looking at her. That is not honor. That is just math. I do not understand. Marcus finally raised his eyes, and Zythara saw something in them that she had never seen in any species. She saw grief and rage and love and loss, all tangled together in a knot that could never be undone. Your daughter's life is worth more than mine, he said. Her people's lives are worth more than ours, so we paid the price. That is what humans do. Why? Zythara asked, and she genuinely wanted to know, why would you die for people who are not your own? Marcus was silent for a long moment, because we remember what it was like to be alone. He finally said, we remember what it was like to look up at the stars and wonder if anyone would help us if we called. We remember the silence. He turned back to his casualty reports. We never want anyone else to hear that silence, he said quietly. So, we answer every call, even when it kills us. Zythara stood there for a long time, watching this strange human mourn his dead. She had thought she understood what humans were. She had thought they were primitive and short-lived and ultimately insignificant. She had been wrong. Humans were something else entirely. They were proof that the will to protect could be stronger than the will to survive. They were warriors who fought not for glory or conquest, but for the simple hope that someone somewhere might live because of their sacrifice. They were terrifying, and for the first time in her long life, Queen Zythara of the Valorian Empire felt something she had never expected to feel toward a human: respect. 3 years into the marriage, Princess Lyrith was not the same person who had stood trembling at the altar. She had changed in ways that made her mother deeply uncomfortable. Queen Zythara first noticed it during a council meeting, when Lyrith interrupted a senior admiral to ask a sharp question about fleet deployment. The old Lyrith would never have spoken without permission. The old Lyrith would have sat silently and let the adults make decisions. This new Lyrith demanded answers. If we concentrate our forces at the Kirith Gateway, we leave the mining colonies vulnerable, Lyrith said, her voice carrying across the chamber. What happens to the civilians if the swarm breaks through our secondary line? The admiral sputtered in outrage. Princess, with respect, these are military matters that will decide whether 40 million of our people live or die. Lyrith cut him off. I think that gives me the right to ask questions. Zythara watched her daughter with narrowed eyes. This was not the quiet, obedient princess she had raised. This was something else. something that spoke with confidence and demanded to be heard, and Zidara knew exactly who was responsible. Marcus Cole sat beside his wife during the council meetings, saying little, but always listening. He did not interrupt or offer opinions unless asked, but whenever Lyrith spoke, his eyes would light up with something that looked like pride. After the meeting, Zidara summoned her daughter to a private audience. "You," embarrassed Admiral Dex in front of the entire council. She said coldly, "Such behavior is beneath your station." Lyrith did not apologize. Admiral Dex was proposing a strategy that would have gotten millions killed. She replied, "Someone needed to point that out. That is not your place." "Then whose place is it?" "Mother?" Lyrith's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "The advisors who are too afraid of you to speak the truth? The courtiers who care more about their positions than the lives of common people? Someone has to ask the hard questions. Marcus taught me that." There it was, human influence that Zidara had feared from the beginning. "And what else has your human taught you?" she asked. Not bothering to hide her disdain, Lyrith smiled. And it was not the polite diplomatic smile she had worn for 200 years. It was something fiercer, something almost human. "He taught me that I am allowed to have opinions," she said. "He taught me that my voice matters, even when powerful people would prefer I stay silent. He taught me that being royal does not mean being a decoration. Those are dangerous lessons," Zidara warned. "They are necessary lessons," Lyrith replied, "and that is not all I have learned." She stepped closer to her mother, and Zidara noticed that her daughter no longer bowed her head in automatic deference. "I have been reading human history," Lyrith continued. "Did you know that they spent most of their existence fighting each other? They had thousands of separate nations on their homeworld, each convinced that they were superior to the others. They killed millions of their own kind over territory and resources and ideas." "Barbaric," Zidara said, just as she had said many times before. "Perhaps," Lyrith agreed, "but they survived it. They united. And when they finally reached the stars, they carried all those lessons with them. What lessons could possibly come from such violence?" Lyrith's eyes met her mother's, and Zidara saw something new in them. She saw fire. "The lesson that strength is not about superiority," Lyrith said, "is about endurance, about adaptation, about the willingness to suffer for something beyond yourself." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Mother, do you know why Marcus agreed to this marriage?" "Political advantage," Zidara replied without hesitation. "The humans wanted a foothold in Valorian politics." "No." Lyrith shook her head. "Marcus lost everything in the Battle of New Helsinki. His wife, his 2 children, his entire colony. Every person you loved was burned alive when the Kefari attacked." Zidara had not known this. She had not bothered to learn anything about the humans. Pasti was a tool, nothing more. Why would she care about the history of a tool? "He could have surrendered to despair," Lyrith continued. "He could have died in battle, seeking an end to his pain. Instead, he became an ambassador. He dedicated his life to building alliances because he believed that preventing others from experiencing what he did was worth living for. He agreed to marry me not for political power, but because he thought it might save lives. That does not change what he is," Zidara said, but her voice was less certain than before. "And what is he, Mother?" Lyrith's question hung in the air between them. Is he a primitive brute, driven by animal instincts? Is he a short-lived creature too stupid to matter? Or is he something else? Is he perhaps the kindest, most selfless person I have ever met? The silence stretched between mother and daughter like a chasm. "Marcus has never asked me for anything," Lyrith said quietly. "He sleeps in a separate chamber to respect my comfort. He learns our customs, so he does not give offense. When courtiers insult him, he deflects their hatred so it does not touch me. He protects me from my own people." She met her mother's eyes, and there was no fear in her gaze. He protects me, Lyrith repeated. In ways you never did. Zithara felt something cold settle in her chest. You have forgotten your place, she said. No, Mother. Lyrith turned toward the door. I have finally found it. She paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder. Marcus did not force me to become this, she said. He simply showed me that I could be more than a peon. You're game board, and I chose to become it myself. The human way is not about being the strongest. It is about refusing to stay broken. She walked out without asking permission, and Queen Zithara, ruler of 1,000 worlds, found herself standing alone in an empty room, wondering when she had lost control of her own daughter, wondering if perhaps she had never really known her daughter at all, wondering if the human she had dismissed as worthless had given Lyrith something that 10,000 years of Valorian civilization never could, the gift of believing in herself. The assassination attempt came on the 5th anniversary of the marriage. A faction of Valorian purists had been growing in power for years, whispering in dark corners about the human contamination of their pure bloodline. They called Princess Lyrith a traitor to her species. They called Marcus Cole a disease that needed to be cut out. And, on the day that should have been a celebration, they decided to act. The ceremony was held in the Grand Plaza, with thousands of citizens gathered to witness the renewal of the alliance. Vaus Lyrith stood on the raised platform beside her husband, wearing ceremonial robes that sparkled in the sunlight. She was pregnant. The doctors had said it should be impossible, that human and Valorian biology were too different for reproduction. But life had found a way, as it always did, and Lyrith carried within her a child that represented the future of both their peoples. Marcus stood beside her, wearing the formal uniform of a Terran ambassador. His hair was fully gray now, and the lines on his face had deepened with age. Humans live such short lives, and the years showed on them in ways that Valorians never experienced. But his eyes were still sharp, still watchful, still scanning every crowd for threats. He saw the assassins half a second before they fired. 3 Valorians in ceremonial guard uniforms raised their weapons simultaneously, energy weapons, designed to kill quickly and cleanly. They were aimed at Lyrith's heart. Marcus did not think, he did not calculate odds or consider consequences. He simply moved his body, slammed into Lyrith, pushing her aside as the energy bolt that would have killed her struck him instead. The blast burned through his chest, through the heart that had already survived so much pain. He fell to the platform floor, his blood spreading a pool of red beneath him. The guards swarmed. The assassin screams filled the plaza. Chaos erupted everywhere. But Lyrith saw none of it. She fell to her knees beside her husband, her hands pressing against the wound that she already knew was fatal. Human bodies were so fragile, so easily broken, and Marcus was dying. No, she whispered, and then louder. No, no, no. Marcus looked up at her, and somehow he smiled. Blood stained his teeth, and his breathing was wet and ragged, but he smiled. Hey, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Hey, you are okay. That is what matters. Why did you do that? Lyrith demanded, tears streaming down her face. Why did you jump in front of me? You could have dodged. You could have let the guards handle it. Why? Marcus reached up with a shaking hand and touched her cheek. His fingers left streaks of red on her silver scales. Because I love you, he said. Took me a while to figure it out, but I do. I love who you have become. I love who you are going to be. His hand fell away. His eyes began to lose focus. Take care of our kid, he whispered. Tell them about Earth. Tell them about the stars. Tell them that their father died protecting something precious. Marcus, please, Lyrith begged. Please do not leave me. But humans could not simply choose to keep living. Their bodies did not work that way. Marcus Cole died on the platform, exactly as he had lived, giving everything he had for someone else. Queen Zithara pushed through the crowd, Her guards clearing a path before her, she reached the platform and stopped, staring at the scene before her daughter knelt in a pool of human blood, cradling the body of the man she had sold for political advantage, the man she had considered worthless, the man she had planned to discard when he was no longer useful, the man who had just died saving her daughter's life for the first time in centuries. Zithara felt tears form in her eyes. Humans had a word for what she was feeling. They called it regret. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The purest faction was destroyed, its members executed for treason. Human-Valorian relations deepened into something that no one had expected, and Princess Lyrith, carrying the first hybrid child in galactic history, emerged as a leader in her own right. She addressed the Grand Assembly on the day she officially became Crown Princess. Her voice was steady, her eyes dry, and around her neck she wore a simple pendant. It was Marcus's wedding ring, resized to fit a Valorian chain. I stand before you today as proof that the universe is larger than our fears, she said. I was born a princess of this empire, raised to believe that Valorians were superior to all other species. I was taught that humans were primitive, short-lived, and ultimately insignificant. I was wrong. She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. Humanity does not win because they are stronger than us, she continued. They do not win because they live longer or think faster or possess greater technology. They win because they refuse to stop caring. They carry their dead with them wherever they go. They remember every sacrifice, every loss, every moment of pain, and they build futures worthy of the people who gave everything so those futures could exist. Her eyes found her mother across the chamber. Zithara sat on her throne, her face expressionless, but Lyrith could see the weight that pressed down on her shoulders. My husband taught me that the greatest strength in the universe is not power, Lyrith said. It is love fierce enough to die for. Some of us learn that lesson when we are young. Some of us learn it too late, and some of us never learn it at all. She touched the ring at her throat. I refuse to be among those who never learn, she said. My child will know their father's story. They will know that humans are not weak because they die. They are strong because they choose what to die for. And Marcus Cole chose me. The assembly was silent. Let this be our lesson, Lyrith concluded. Let this be what we remember. When a human loves you, they love you with everything they have. They love you enough to stand between you and death. They love you enough to sacrifice their own brief lives so that you can live your long ones. That is not weakness. That is the most powerful thing in the universe. She stepped back from the podium, and the assembly erupted in applause. But Lyrith did not hear it. She was looking at her mother, at the queen who had forced this union for political gain, who had traded her daughter's happiness for military support. Zithara met her eyes, and for a moment, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, perhaps that would never come, but understanding. Gicha had wanted to save her empire. She had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, and she would spend the rest of her long life knowing that she had been given a gift beyond price and had never recognized its value until it was gone. Marcus Cole had been worth more than all the ships and soldiers in the galaxy. He had been proof that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their ferocity. It was their capacity to love, and that love had transformed everything it touched. A princess who had been sold as a political pawn had become a leader in an empire that had despised humans, had learned to respect Thema. Child who should have been impossible was growing in Lyrith's belly, and a queen who had never believed in anything but power was finally learning the bitter taste of regret. The humans had a saying that Marcus had once shared with Lyrith. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, they said. The second best time is today. Zithara had missed her chance to plant that tree, but as she watched her daughter walk out of the assembly chamber, head held high, she knew that the seeds Marcus Cole had planted would grow into something beautiful, even if she would never deserve to see it bloom.